Now had the season returned. When the nights grow colder and longer, and the retreating sun, the sign of the scorpion, enters. Birds of passage sailed through the leaden air, from the ice-bound desolate northern bays to the shores of tropical islands. Harvests were gathered in, and wild with the winds of September wrestled the trees of the forest as Jacob of old with the angel. All the signs foretold a winter long and inclement. Bees with prophetic instinct of want had hoarded their honey till the hives overflowed, and the Indian hunters asserted cold would the winter be, for thick was the fur of the foxes. Such was the advent of autumn. Then followed that beautiful season, called by the pious Acadian peasants the summer of all saints. Filled was the air with a dreamy and magical light, and the landscape lay as if new created in all the freshness of childhood. Peace seemed to reign upon earth, and the restless heart of the ocean was for a moment consoled. All sounds were in harmony blended. Voices of children at play, the crowing of cocks in the farmyards, whir of wings in the drowsy air, and the cooing of pigeons. All were subdued, and low as the murmurs of love, and the great sun looked with the eye of love through the golden vapors around him, while arrayed in its robes of russet and scarlet and yellow, bright with the sheen of the dew, each glittering tree of the forest flashed like the plane tree the Persian adorned with mantles and jewels. Now recommenced the reign of rest and affection and stillness. Day with its burden and heat had departed, and twilight descending brought back the evening star to the sky and the herds to the homestead. Pawing the ground they came, and resting their necks on each other, and with their nostrils descended, inhaling the freshness of evening. Foremost, bearing the bell, Evangeline's beautiful heifer, proud of her snow-white hide and the ribbon that waved from her collar. Quietly paced and slow, as if conscious of human affection. Then came the shepherd, back with his bleating flocks from the seaside. Where was their favorite pasture? Behind them followed the watchdog, patient, full of importance, and grand in the pride of his instinct, walking from side to side with a lordly air, and superbly waving his bushy tail, and urging forward the stragglers. Regent of flocks was he when the shepherd slept, their protector when from the forest at night through the starry silence the wolves howled. Late, with the rising moon, returned the wains from the marshes, laden with briny hay that filled the air with its odor. Cheerily neighed the steeds with dew on their manes and their fetlocks, while aloft on their shoulders the wooden and ponderous saddles, painted with brilliant dyes and adorned with tassels of crimson, nodded in bright array, like hollyhocks heavy with blossoms. Patiently stood the cows meanwhile, and yielded their udders unto the milkmaid's hand, whilst loud and in regular cadence into the sounding pails the foaming streamlets descended. Lowing of cattle and peals of laughter were heard in the farmyard, echoed back by the barns. Anon they sank into stillness, heavily closed with a jarring sound. The valves of the barn doors rattled the wooden bars, and all for a season was silent. Indoors, warm by the wide-mouthed fireplace, idly the farmer sat in his elbow chair and watched how the flames and the smoke wreaths struggled together like foes in a burning city. Behind him, nodding and mocking along the wall, with gestures fantastic, darted his own huge shadow and vanished away into darkness. Faces, clumsily carved in oak, and on the back of his armchair laughed in the flickering light, and the pewter plates on the dresser caught and reflected the flame as shields of armies the sunshine. Fragments of song the old man sang, and the carols of Christmas, such as at home in the olden time his fathers before him sang in the Norman orchards and the bright Burgundian vineyards. Close at her father's side was the gentle Evangeline seated, spinning flax for the loom that stood in the corner behind her. Silent a while were his treadles. At rest was its diligent shuttle, while the monotonous drone of the wheel, like the drone of a bagpipe, followed the old man's song and united the fragments together. As in a church, when the chant of the choir, at intervals, ceases, footfalls are heard in the aisles, or words of the priest at the altar. So in each pause of the song, with measured motion, the clock clicked. Thus as they sat, there were footsteps heard, and suddenly lifted, sounded the wooden latch, and the door swung back on its hinges. Benedict knew by the hobnailed shoes it was Basil the blacksmith, and by her beating heart Evangeline knew who was with him. "Welcome," the farmer exclaimed as their footsteps paused on the threshold. "Welcome, Basil, my friend. Come take thy place on the settle, close by the chimney side, which is always empty without thee. Take from the shelf overhead thy pipe and the box of tobacco. Never so much thyself art thou, as when through the curling smoke of the pipe of the forge thy friendly and jovial face gleams, round and red as the harvest moon through the midst of the marshes." Then with a smile of content, thus answered Basil the blacksmith, taking with easy air the accustomed seat by the fireside. "Benedict Bellefontaine, that was ever thy jest and thy ballad. Ever in cheerfullest mood art thou, when others are filled with gloomy forebodings of ill, and see only ruin before them. Happy art thou as if every day thou hadst pick up a horseshoe." Pausing a moment to take the pipe that Evangeline brought him, and with a coal from the embers had lighted, he slowly continued. 4 days now are past since the English ships at their anchors ride in the Gaspereau's mouth, with their cannon pointed against us. What their design may be is unknown, but all are commanded on the morrow to meet in the church, where His Majesty's mandate will be proclaimed as law in the land. Alas, in the meantime, many surmises of evil alarm the hearts of the people. Then made answer the farmer, "Perhaps some friendlier purpose brings these ships to our shores. Perhaps the harvests in England, by untimely rains or untimelier heat, have been blighted, and from our bursting barns they would feed their cattle and children." "Not so thinketh the folk in the village," said warmly the blacksmith, shaking his head as in doubt. Then heaving a sigh, he continued, "Louisbourg is not forgotten, nor Bourg Séjour, nor Port Royal. Many already have fled to the forest and lurk on its outskirts, waiting with anxious hearts the dubious fate of tomorrow. Arms have been taken from us and warlike weapons of all kinds. Nothing is left but the blacksmith's sledge and the scythe of the mower. Then with a pleasant smile made answer the jovial farmer, "Safer are we unarmed in the midst of our flocks and our cornfields, safer within these peaceful dikes besieged by the ocean, than our fathers in forts besieged by the enemy's cannon. Fear no evil, my friend, and tonight may no shadow of sorrow fall on this house and hearth, for this is the night of the contract. Built are the house and the barn. The merry lads of the village strongly have built them in the well, and breaking the glebe around about them, filled the barn with hay and the house with food for a 12-month. René Leblanc will be here anon, with his papers and inkhorn. Shall we not then be glad and rejoice in the joys of our children?" As apart by the window she stood, with her hand in her lover's, blushing Evangeline heard the words that her father had spoken, and as they died on his lips, the worthy notary entered.